She's trespassing.
Arrest him right now! Linda's voice cut through the music as the string quartet stopped mid-song. My daughter froze in her white dress at the end of the dock. Half the guests turned toward me like I was the criminal. 2 police officers stood between me and the water. One of them said, "Sir, the HOA president claims you're disrupting a private event." I looked past him at the huge wedding arch tied to my dock. The white chairs. The flowers. The champagne table sitting on the wooden boards I built with my own hands. "My dock isn't private to her," I said calmly. "It's mine." Linda stepped forward in her pastel suit, acting like she owned the lake. "This dock sits on community water. That makes it HOA property. You were notified last month." She waved a paper in the air. I almost laughed. Last month? I was deployed overseas for 6 months before that. Retired military, single dad. Saved for 10 years to buy this lake house after my wife passed. That dock was the last thing she helped design before cancer took her. Every plank had memories in it. But Linda didn't care about that. She leaned closer and whispered so only I could hear. "Your daughter begged us to use it. You weren't here. We voted. It's ours for the weekend." My chest tightened. I turned to my daughter. She looked confused. "Dad, they said you approved it." I felt the sting right there. "I never signed anything." The officer looked at Linda. "Ma'am, do you have proof of ownership transfer?" She shoved the paper toward him. HOA authority form. I stepped forward slowly. "Officer, check the county records before you move me off my own property." Linda rolled her eyes dramatically. He's always like this. Difficult, angry veteran with control issues. Some guests started whispering. That's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Thick white ropes had been tied from my dock to 3, small anchor posts hammered into the lake bed. The entire wedding platform, chairs, arch, sound system, was secured out over deeper water. Without my permission, I looked at the knots, and I recognized them instantly. They weren't decorative knots. They were marine tension locks. Professional. My voice got quiet. "Who tied those ropes?" Linda smiled proudly. "My nephew owns a boating company. We secured it properly so you couldn't interfere." I walked to the edge of the dock and crouched down. The officers watched carefully. One of them said, "Sir, don't do anything you'll regret." I ran my hand along the wood grain my wife once sanded smooth. Then I stood up slowly. "Officer," I said, steady voice, "I built this dock under a private shoreline permit. The lake boundary line sits 6 feet beyond these posts. Everything tied past that line is not attached to HOA land." Linda's smile faded just a little. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the county shoreline map. Saved for years. Never needed it. Until today. I turned the screen toward the officer. He looked at it. Then at the rope stretching past the legal boundary. "You're saying this entire setup is floating over your private extension?" "Yes," I said. Linda snapped. "That's ridiculous. It's community water." I looked her dead in the eyes and said, the one line that made the closest. Guests go silent. "Water may be public, but the ground under it isn't." The wind picked up lightly across the lake. The white fabric of the wedding arch fluttered. My daughter stepped closer to me, confused and hurt. "Dad, what's happening?" I swallowed hard. And then I saw something else. Those anchor posts in the lake bed, they weren't drilled legally. They were temporary spikes, hammered into soft sediment, which meant one thing. They were only stable because the ropes were tight, very tight. I looked at the main release knot. One pull, that's all it would take. I didn't move yet, but Linda must have seen something in my face, because for the first time she didn't look confident. She looked nervous, and that's when I quietly said, "You should have checked who you were tying knots against." Linda stepped back fast. "Don't you dare!" she snapped, her voice shaking now. The guests started murmuring louder. Some stood up. My daughter grabbed my arm. "Dad, please don't ruin this." That hit harder than anything Linda said. I looked at her, my little girl trying to hold her wedding together while standing in the middle of a power fight she never asked for. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "I'm not ruining anything. I'm protecting what's ours." One of the officers stepped closer. "Sir, if you damage property—" "It's already damaged," I replied calmly. "They drilled into my deck without permission. Check the bolts near the base." The officer crouched and ran his hand along the wood. Fresh drill marks. Split grain around 2 support beams. Linda tried to interrupt. We had to secure it. Safety first! The officer looked up at her. Did you have written consent? She didn't answer. For a second, it felt like I had the upper hand. But then my daughter's fiancé walked over. Sir, with respect, we paid the HOA event fee. They told us this dock was common access. My heart dropped again. Paid. Linda had charged them. I turned slowly toward her. You took money for something you don't own? She folded her arms. The board approved it. The second officer spoke into his radio quietly. I couldn't hear what he said, but his tone changed, serious. The wind picked up more. The lake surface started moving rougher. The tension ropes creaked. One of the older guests whispered, "That platform's shifting." And it was. The arch leaned slightly. The sound system table wobbled. Linda's nephew, the so-called boating expert, rushed forward. It's fine. It's balanced. But I could see it wasn't. The anchor spikes were loosening in the soft lake floor. Too much weight. Too many people on one side. Then the first real scare happened. A loud crack echoed from underneath. My daughter gasped. One of the support planks split where they drilled into it. Not fully broken, but stressed. The officer shouted, "Everyone off the dock now!" Panic spread fast. Guests in formal clothes shuffled back toward shore. High heels slipping, kids crying. Someone knocked over a flower stand. Linda yelled, "Stay calm! It's under control!" But it wasn't. The ropes tightened sharply as a wave hit sideways. The entire wedding setup shifted a few inches farther out. My daughter's train dragged near the water. I moved instantly. Not angry, not dramatic, just trained. Everyone stepped back in a straight line. "Slow," I commanded. My military voice came out without thinking, firm, clear. People listened. Within seconds, the dock was mostly clear except for the main platform area tied beyond the legal boundary. The officer looked at me. "What do you need?" I pointed at the center tension rope. "If that one snaps under load, the whole thing will tilt." Linda's nephew tried to grab it. "I've got it!" The rope jerked violently in his hands. He slipped and almost went over the edge. I caught him by the jacket collar and pulled him back. Ups and downs in one breath. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were full of tears now. "Dad," this was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, and it turned into a fight over ego and control. Linda suddenly changed tone. "Okay, fine. We can move it. Just don't make a scene." I stared at her. "You already did." The second officer walked back over. "Ma'am, we just confirmed through county records. The dock and submerged extension are privately permitted to him. HOA has zero claim." Murmurs turned into sharp whispers. Linda's face went pale again. But she tried one more move. "Even if that's true, if you release those ropes and something gets damaged, you'll be responsible." That was the moment. The emotional drop before the rise. My daughter stepped forward. "Dad, is it safe?" I looked at the water, the wind, the loose spikes, the over-tightened knots. Then I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "But only if we do it my way." The officer nodded. "We'll supervise?" Linda backed away slowly, realizing control had slipped from her hands. I grabbed the main rope. The wind blew harder. The guests held their breath, and I said quietly, almost to myself, "You don't steal a man's dock and expect him not to know how it floats." Then I pulled. The first tension lock snapped loose. The platform shifted. Gasps everywhere. But it didn't flip. It drifted. Slow at first, then smoother. Carried by the natural current toward the open side of the lake. Away from the dock, away from the stress point. The heavy weight lifted off my beams instantly. The dock settled back into place. People thought it would sink. It didn't. It floated clean and steady about 15 feet out, now fully separated from my property. My daughter looked at me confused. "Dad, the wedding..." I smiled gently. "Who says it has to be tied down?" The officers watched closely as I loosened the secondary lines one by one, adjusting balance so the platform stayed level. Years of Marine training, calm hands, ups and downs, tension then relief. Within minutes, the wedding arch was floating peacefully on open water, no longer touching my dock. The lake was quiet again. Linda stood there soaked in humiliation instead of water. But this story wasn't done rising yet, because as the platform drifted into position, something inside the arch shifted, and a loud splash suddenly broke the calm. Everyone froze at the sound of that splash. For half a second, my heart stopped. Then I saw it. One of the rented speaker. Boxes had tipped off the table and fallen into the water. Not a person. Not my daughter. Just equipment. But panic had already spread. A few guests screamed. Someone shouted, "The platform's sinking!" It wasn't sinking. It was tilting slightly because the weight shifted when the speaker fell. I stepped to the edge and raised my voice, calm but firm. Nobody moved suddenly. Stay centered. My daughter and her fiancé stood under the arch, holding each other. The arch swayed, but it stayed upright. The officers watched closely. One of them said quietly to Linda, "This is what happens when you fake authority." She didn't answer. Her makeup was streaking down her face now. The crowd wasn't looking at me like a problem anymore. They were looking at her. I grabbed a spare rope from my storage box and tied it to a small cleat on the dock, not to pull the platform back, but to stabilize its drift. Controlled movement, not force. That's when the real reality hit. My daughter looked at me and said softly, "Dad, we don't even care about the dock. We just wanted to get married." That line broke something inside me. All this fighting, all this proving ownership, and she just wanted a moment. I looked at the lake. The floating platform had drifted. About 20 feet out now, stable, peaceful, sunlight, breaking through the clouds. And then something unexpected happened. The older officer took off his hat and said, "You know, I've seen beach weddings done exactly like this. It's actually safer floating free than over-tensioned." A few guests nodded. The tension in the air slowly changed. Linda tried one last weak move. "This is still unauthorized use of community." "Ma'am," the officer cut her off sharply. "Community water does not mean community dock, and you charge them money under false claim." Her mouth opened. But nothing came out. My daughter wiped her tears and suddenly laughed. Not nervous. Not angry, just real. "Dad," she said, smiling through the chaos, "can you walk me down?" "From here?" She pointed to the shore. Not the dock. The grass. Right there by the lake. Simple. Natural. No ropes. No fake authority. Just family. I nodded. Within minutes, guests helped carry the chairs onto the lawn. Shoes came off. Jackets were set aside. Someone picked up a guitar from the car instead of the sound system. The floating arch drifted softly in the background like a symbol, not a stage. The officer stood nearby, not as enforcement, but as witness. And then I walked my daughter across the grass toward the waterline. No grand music, just wind and small waves. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman?" I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just said one clear line that everyone heard. "I do, freely." That word hung in the air. Freely. No HOA vote. No fake forms. No forced control. Just choice. They exchanged vows with the lake behind them, and the floating arch, drifting peacefully in the distance. The sun came out fully. Light hit the water like it planned to be there all along. And Linda? She stood alone near the edge of the driveway, watching the wedding continue without her control. One of the board members quietly walked over to her and said, "You charged them $2,000 for this." Her face tightened. The officer added, "We'll need a statement about that." Reality doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just closes in slowly. After the ceremony, guests clapped louder than any music could have carried. My daughter hugged me tight. "You didn't let them take it from us." I looked at the floating platform one more time. "I didn't let them tie us down," I said. Later that evening, as people packed up, the second officer handed me a small card. "If you want to file formal charges for property damage and fraud, call this number." I nodded. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. As the sun set, the lake was calm again. The dock stood solid, untouched now. And the platform, still floating, perfectly balanced, no ropes holding it hostage. Sometimes the strongest move isn't pulling harder. It's letting go at the right time. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. One of the guests had recorded the whole thing, Linda yelling, the fake HOA form, the officers confirming ownership, the ropes releasing, the wedding continuing without her. It wasn't edited. It wasn't dramatic. It was just real, and people noticed. Comments poured in about land rights, about veterans being pushed around, about neighbors who think a title makes them king. But the line that spread the most was simple. You don't steal a man's dock and expect him not to know how it floats. By Monday, 3 HOA board members called an emergency meeting. Not to fine me, to remove her. Turns out this wasn't her first stunt. She'd been collecting event fees for years. Charging for driveway use. Charging for guest parking. Charging late fines without votes. Most neighbors were too busy to check the bylaws, but now they checked, and they were angry. The retired judge who lived 2 streets over stood up in that meeting and said, "Authority without consent is just noise." The vote to remove Linda was unanimous, but that wasn't even the best part. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at my house. The HOA formally admitted fault. They refunded my daughter and her fiancé every dollar she had charged, plus paid for the damaged planks on my dock. The board also passed a new rule. No HOA officer could authorize private property. Use without recorded owner consent. Simple, clear, fair. Linda tried to fight it at first. She claimed emotional distress, claimed I embarrassed her publicly, but the video didn't lie, and neither did the county permit. She resigned quietly within the week. No big speech, no more pastel suits, just a moving truck early in the morning. The real happy ending came that Friday evening. My daughter and her husband came back to the lake house, still in their wedding clothes. Just immediate family this time. No tension. No police, no HOA. I had repaired the dock myself. Sanded it smooth again, stronger bolts. Clean lines. We set up a small dinner right there at sunset. And this time, when my daughter stepped onto the dock, she smiled and said, "Dad, can we tie a boat out there?" I looked at the open water and laughed. "Only if we're the ones holding the rope." We tied a small lantern boat and let it drift gently, not forced, not anchored tight, just floating within reach. Her husband raised a glass and said, "To standing your ground." I shook my head softly. No, to knowing when to. The lake was calm. The dock didn't creak. No fake notices taped to doors. No shouting. Just family. Before they left, my daughter hugged me again and whispered, "Mom would have been proud." That hit deep. I looked at the water glowing gold in the sunset and felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not victory. Peace. Because in the end, it was never about winning against Linda. It was about protecting what mattered, without becoming what we hate. And as that small lantern floated across the lake, steady and free, I realized something simple. You can't control the water. You can only decide how you stand beside it.